It is my favorite time of year, that being new journal setup season. Time to crack into new notebooks, put pen to paper, and set our intentions for the period ahead. In this new bullet journal setup, I wanted to lean into the idea of favorites by going with one of my favorite decorative themes, but this journal isn't actually going to be for me. But maybe it's for you. Stay tuned for more on that, but heading into the first page, we're setting up a year at a glance. I love having a year at a glance layout just so that I have that as a reference in my start of journal setup. I find myself pretty constantly flipping back to it to check what day each month starts on and what day of the week each day of the month falls on. Super handy for when you need to make plans or you just want to see how far through the year you are. To help with that in particular, I like to have the week numbers just so I can kind of keep tabs on how much time we have left in any quarter or the year as a whole. Before putting the calendars in though, I first went in with the bullet end of my Tombow dual brush marker to draw a simple grid for the background. This is a really great way to just fill the space in the layout, and also it's going to be one of the key features in the decoration that I'm using in the setup. I'll be repeating it through each of the pages to build consistency, and I decided to freehand it rather than rule it, mainly because I wanted it to have a kind of hand-drawn look to it. That being said, something I was not going to hand draw were the floral elements that I wanted to use as decoration as well. This is a PET tape from the washi tape shop. Such a gorgeous color palette and it makes for such easy decoration. All you have to do is cut out the individual floral elements and then stick them to the page. Because it's a PET tape rather than a washi tape, it blends in really nicely with the background, and anything that isn't the floral design itself is fully transparent, which means you can still see that grid pattern in the background. In terms of the mini calendars, so that I didn't have to write every single number in myself, which would have been time consuming, I opted for printables on sticker paper. This meant that I could lay the calendars over the top of the decoration, which made for a quicker setup. I didn't have to kind of like fussy cut around any of the PET elements and then stick those around the calendars that I'd already drawn in. Also, another nice thing is that by printing out the calendars rather than handwriting them, I could move into the next parts of the setup that require a little bit more to be drawn by hand without having my hand all sore and cramped up from writing all of those little numbers. If you too did not want to get a hand cramp and a half by writing out all of the little numbers for your start of journal setup, then this one is a free printable that's accessible through our resource library. That one's linked in the description box below for you to download for free. In terms of timing, from first touch of the pen to final erasings, this layout took about 10 minutes to set up, though notably would have taken longer if I had to write all of those numbers myself. The main bulk of the time though was spent on that grid background, making sure that I was getting it as straight as possible, especially because this is the first layout that I set up in the setup, so I was being a little bit more cautious, making sure I had all of that line work in the right place. Flipping over though, and the next layout we're going to be setting up is a future log, or effectively what is a box for each month of the year. The structure of this one has 6 months per page, and I'm going in first to do the black boxes rather than the background grid. That's because I want these boxes to look like they're sitting on top of the grid, and if I went and put the grid all over the page, then I'd have to like cover up the areas I put the grid where the monthly boxes are supposed to be. A lot easier to just go in with the boxes first. In terms of structure, this one is pretty simple. We just have 6 months per page, so 3 along the top and 3 along the bottom, each with plenty of space to write down events. Some people don't feel that it's super necessary to have both a year at a glance and a future log, but typically that's a point that's brought up by people who put mini calendars on their future log, and we're not going to have those in this setup. By not having those mini calendars in here, it means that there is ample space to write down anything you need to, but we still have those mini calendar references on the year at a glance page at the front. It also means that we had a convenient use for that first, sometimes awkward page, the one that kind of gets stuck to the front cover card, which you might not necessarily want to put something that you need to do a lot of writing on. Because the year at a glance is just a reference, it means that once you've set it up, it's pretty much done with, whereas something like a future log that we're setting up here, that one you're going to come back to time and time again to add new events as they get scheduled. Now, as I said, technically this layout is just a box per month for each of the months of the year, so this doesn't have to be used as a future log at all. We don't have to record future events and appointments on this page. Instead, it could be for a monthly summary, a monthly favorites list. Technically at this stage it doesn't have to be monthly at all, we haven't gone and labeled the boxes, though though I will go and do that towards the end. But there are a lot of different ways that you can use a layout like this outside of just a typical future log for recording future events. Now I guess that begs the question, why would it be important for somebody to have flexible pages in a start of journal setup? This could be something that you try and build into your own setup, just in the case that you're setting up your journal in advance and maybe some of the layouts that you initially think you'll need end up becoming obsolete by the time you come to use your journal. By having layouts like this where you can populate the information in a range of different ways, it means that when you actually come to use your journal, you can use it in a way that is fitting. For instance, if the initial idea for this layout was a future log, but by the time the new year rolls around, you've decided you're using a digital calendar for that, because we haven't put down a title like future log or anything like that, it means that what this page actually gets used for is a little bit more flexible. In terms of why I am setting it up as a flexible one though, that's because this journal isn't actually for me. Instead, it's going to be a giveaway prize for one lucky channel subscriber. If you want to enter to win this journal, first I do encourage you to watch the rest of the video to make sure that you like the setup, but once you've decided that you want to win, there's only 2 simple steps you need to follow. 1, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and 2, comment to let me know that you want to win. That's it. That is literally it. I enjoy making competition entry as easy mode as possible, so just subscribe and comment to be in to win this one. You'll have seen though that once all of the boxes were in, I then went and did that background grid work, making sure to pay particular attention to the size of the gap between each of the lines, because all too many times when I do this kind of grid pegboard style, I stuff up the spacing and then have to do a whole bunch of mistake fixes. This time though, somehow in this entire setup, I did not stuff up that line work once. Well, not the spacing of it, I definitely had some wobbly lines that I did have to fix, but I think it shows genuine progress that I did not stuff up the spacing. After all the decoration was in though, I just needed to label the boxes with the month names, and in terms of timing, this one took about 27 minutes to set up. It was the layout that took the longest in the entire of the setup. I didn't make this any kind of race with myself to get through it as fast as possible. As said, new journal setup season is one of my favorites, and even though I'm going to be doing so much setting up over the next couple of months, this is the one that I was starting with. I wanted to take my time and enjoy the process. Flipping over though, and we're onto a layout that is most suitable for the new year, and that is a reflection space for the previous year. I am a big believer in reflection. I think that it's a super powerful tool that can really help us make the most of our time, be intentional with our action taking, and ensure that we're making progress in the right direction. I wanted our giveaway winner to have a pre-scaffolded space where they could reflect on the year that was, especially because I know that for a lot of people, reflection is a little bit daunting because they don't know how to do it. It's not necessarily a skill that a lot of us are taught, so I wanted to have a space that was already pre-set up for our giveaway winner. In terms of the sections that I'm setting up on the left-hand side, we have a space to outline any achievements or wins from the year, really to highlight any progress they've already made towards the goals that they had, or possibly goals that they've finished completely. I wanted to have a space for memories, because it's always good to highlight the things that were exciting or just in general memorable from the year that was. And of course, if we're going to have a space for achievements, it's also good to have a space for challenges. I've made this one a little bit smaller than the achievements box because this kind of helps us combat our negativity bias. I find that oftentimes the not so good things that happened are a little bit easier to remember than the good things, so I always try to limit the amount of space I give myself to reflect on those parts in particular. The box at the bottom though is going to be for any lessons learned from any of the previously mentioned boxes. It's not just our challenges that we can learn from. We can also learn from our memories and our accomplishments too. In terms of the purpose of reflecting on the year that has passed, this allows us to not only highlight the positives and acknowledge the challenges, we use both of them to learn about ourselves, either as goal getters or goal setters, and then we can take that information and start thinking about what we want for the year ahead. I like to make reflection the first part of my goal setting process for any new period of time, and these 4 starting stages help me get in the right mindset so that I can move into the new year with a bit more clarity about what I do or don't want. This reflective purpose is continued on the right hand side with a few other sections. The one at the top is for what we call a level 10 life. So this is taking each of your different life areas and rating them out of 10, where 10 is like the best it could possibly be, and 1 is everything is abysmal, eternal sadness. I don't fill in what life areas in particular our giveaway winner might want to put in here, mainly because I feel that everybody's life areas are going to be a little bit different. But in terms of the other boxes on that right hand side, we also have ones called keep, stop, and start. This is just thinking about things that you do, either like habits or routines, just little practices in general that you either want to keep doing because you feel that they are constructive to your life, you want to stop doing because they're not taking you where you want to go, or things you want to start doing or maybe try to do more of. In amongst the boxes though, I of course wanted to continue with the decoration, so putting in that grid pattern in the back, and also the PET florals in amongst the boxes. I didn't want these to overlap the boxes though and kind of limit writing space, so I made sure to trim out any of the areas that overlapped into the box area. You'll see that I'm using this decoration on every single layout that we set up in this video. I just like how having these repeated elements kind of helps build up a cohesive setup. It makes it so that all of these pages look like they belong together because you're using these repeated decorative elements, those being the grid, the PET florals, the color palette, and the lettering style. In terms of timing, this one took about 24.5 minutes to set up. That doesn't include idea generation time though, or the pre-planning of the layouts that I did digitally before committing to the pen. I've really been enjoying pre-planning my layouts digitally before going in and like penciling anything in, mainly because it limits how much penciling in you have to do, which also limits how much erasing you have to do. Just helps to speed up the process. The natural progression of reflection though is intention setting, so that is what we are on to next. All of the sections that I'm setting up on this spread are intended to help our giveaway winner brainstorm and select the goals that they want to work on for the new year. Again, I'm going and ruling in these sections first because I want to put that grid behind the boxes and not have any of the grid lines obstruct or get in the way. But on the left-hand page, the 3 sections we're going to have there are a space for brainstorming goals, a space to write down anything that they're excited about, whether that be things that are coming up or things that they're hoping to work on, and then anything that they want to do. This could be like big end-of-life goals or just smaller kind of short-term projects. For the 4 boxes that we have on the right-hand page, the top one is going to be for them to list out their values. I find values to be a really great place to start for goal setting because it means that they already have an innate purpose. They're already aligned with things that we deem important enough to say, I value this. The 2 boxes underneath that is for getting a little bit more negative, so we have a space to list out things that are bothering them and another space to list out things that they're just uncomfortable with. Oftentimes when we set goals, it's as a way to move away from a state of pain or something that we've been avoiding, so it's good to consider those as well when you're trying to brainstorm what goals you might want to work on. Of course, we need a space to list out what those goals are, so the very bottom box is to list out anything they want to work on in the new year. In a lot of the boxes in this setup, I'm including an every second line highlight. Not only does this bring more color onto the page, which I very much appreciate, I'm kind of like allergic to white space, I swear, but also it increases the readability of the information, especially if you have a lot of lists or checklists of information. Being able to distinguish between separate lines and find your place, the second line highlights help for that. There are some boxes I'm not including it in, for instance the brainstorming box, mainly because our winner might want to use that as a mini mind mapping space, so the lines might kind of distract from that. In terms of the second line highlights I've been doing, and also the grid in the background, this one was done with Tombow 990. I do have all the materials I've used linked in the description box if you're curious, but 990 is definitely my go-to light brown Tombow, though I suppose 942 isn't bad either. I have used that one before. In terms of timing, this layout took about 19 minutes to set up. I like to tell you how long it actually took me, mainly because it's a little hard to appreciate that when we're going with a time lapse. I know there are a lot of people who feel like they can't do journaling. It's like, oh, it just takes me so long and everybody online's doing everything so much faster and easier than me. I let you know how long it takes me so that you can appreciate that I am not as fast as the time lapse makes me seem. I want to make sure that my line work looks good, that things aren't in the wrong place, and as mentioned, I just enjoy the process, so I don't want it to be over too quickly. But just in case you were looking to set these layouts up with a similar kind of styling or theme, I don't want you to think you're doing it wrong because it's taking you a while. Because it takes me a while as well. Of course, once we have brainstormed and selected our goals though, we need a plan for action. On this spread here, I'm setting up 2 layouts with key sections for successful goal planning. Oftentimes, people will set themselves intentions for the new year, think about all the things that they want to accomplish, want to do, but then when it comes to actually taking action on them, they don't have a plan for that and thus don't make it very far. I do not want that to be us for the new year. I want us to accomplish these goals that we keep setting for ourselves themselves, so I figured our giveaway winner should probably have a place to plan those goals out. The main sections I'm including on this one are a place to outline what the goal is, a place to specify why they're working on that goal or why it's important to them. Underneath this, there's a few lines to outline the ideal outcome for that goal, so what does success actually look like? And then the rest of the box is dedicated to action steps, or the things that they actually have to do in order to make the goal happen. Both the left-hand side and the right-hand side are going to have the same structure with the same sections, and I've used those second line highlights again to increase the readability and also add some extra color to the page. The concepts behind all of the sections that we've been putting in these goal-related layouts, so the reflection space, the goal brainstorming, selecting, and now the planning spaces, all of these are taken from my course, which is on goal setting and planning, funnily enough. That one's called Epic Goals, and there are details in the description box if you're hoping to crush your goals in the new year. In terms of the decoration on this page, I definitely had some struggles. I got it to a place where I was fairly happy with it, but I will come back in a second and tweak it a little bit. In terms of the headers on the page, I left these ones blank though so they could be filled in by our winner, because I figured they might want to just write in what their goal is or like title for their goal. Effectively, that box can be used for the very brief description when somebody says, hey, what goals are you working on in the new year? Whereas the space in the larger box that says goal is where you kind of elaborate on that, give a little bit more detail. This one took about 16.5 minutes, though I do come back later and fix up the decoration, and that's for the full spread, so per page it's about 8 minutes. The challenge with setting up a journal for someone else is needing to predict what they will actually need and find helpful. As I've been setting up these layouts, I've been trying to build in some flexibility, so the spread we're working on here is going to be another 2 pages that could be used for goal plans, but they don't have the scaffolding in the larger boxes. This means that our winner can use them as a goal planning space if they have more than 2 goals, but otherwise the layouts are open for anything else they might want to put in here. Because I wanted to make this layout as flexible as possible, I also didn't put the every second line highlight, really so that they can use the layout for whatever they want. I know I'm the kind of person who likes to work on multiple goals at once. Usually I'll have about 3 or 4 any quarter, so I figured that having enough layouts to accommodate for all of those was good, but just in case they only want to set themselves maybe 2 goals, I didn't want to fill up all of their start of journal pages with layouts that they're not going to end up using. What I did do though is made sure I had the box there available so that they can put them in if they want them, had decoration around the outside of these, and had that space for the header, which they can fill with whatever they want, whether it be goal related or otherwise. As can be expected, this one took less time to set up compared to the last spread, so coming in at about 11.5 minutes from first touch of the pen. The decoration on this layout though, I feel like I did a lot better than the last one. I kept it mainly focused around the very top of the page, in the center, and then the bottom, and didn't go and add extra decoration to the sides. I think that's possibly where I went wrong on the last layout. I also just find it a lot easier to work with the larger pieces of decoration that have like collections of florals rather than individual pieces, like an individual standalone flower or individual standalone stick of leaves. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So after finishing up the structure of this spread, I turned back to the last one to fix things up a little bit. Technically, I could have left it, like it still looks fairly nice, it's still decorated, and I feel like our giveaway winner will still enjoy it. But I am a little bit of a perfectionist, a bit of a persnickety biscuit, so I wanted to go in and just fix it up, make it so that I felt better about it. If I'm going to make a journal for somebody else, I want it to be my best possible work. Thankfully, getting the PET tape off the page wasn't too difficult, so I could just pull them up, reposition them, or pull them off and kind of scrap them because they weren't quite right. And even though the decoration between the 2 spreads is still different, it feels a lot more balanced between the 2 of them. There are more similarities between the 2 of them now because of where I kind of centered or focused on that decoration. Flipping on over though and getting into the next layout, for this one I wanted to set up another flexible layout, but with a different arrangement of boxes, this time separated into 6 smaller boxes rather than 2 larger ones. I figured that this could be a space for each of the months that this journal is going to hold. Typically when I set up a new journal, it's only going to last me 6 months, so I've gone into this one with that in mind, and I thought it might be nice to have a layout to capture something from those 6 months. This could be a monthly highlight space, reflections, any kind of like memory keeping they want to do, but I also decided to keep it as flexible as possible. I wasn't going to label the boxes with the month names. This means that the layout could also be used for other things, for instance maybe a list of things to check out, so a box for movies, TV shows, games, podcasts, music, and maybe foods they want to try or something similar. If they have 6 key people in their life that they want to have gift ideas for, they could use the page for that. Or really anything else they want to record where it makes sense to have the information split into 6 separate sections. To add some visual interest to the page, I staggered the boxes so they were either left or right aligned, and then I ended up filling in the space between these with more of the PET tape elements. In this one I did opt to use the individual stick of leaves, mainly because there are quite a few different designs on the tape and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to use them. The gap spaces are quite suitable for those, and I do end up going and adding in a header to each of the pages just in case they don't want to use the whole spread for the same type of information. Maybe they want to use the left hand side for 3 separate things and then the right hand side for 3 others. If I were going to use this page, I would probably use it for a monthly summary type thing. Maybe just write down key memories from each of the 6 months that the journal holds, or I'd be inclined to use it as that check it out list. Or even possibly the media I have consumed. That was always something I quite enjoyed putting in my journal, just little snapshots of the stuff that I've been consuming in terms of movies, TV shows, whatnot. It's kind of like a very easy mode version of memory keeping. In terms of timing, this one took about 16 minutes to set up, but if you just wanted to set up the general structure of the layout without the decorative elements like the grid in the background and the PET tape and whatnot, the time taken would definitely be considerably less. A layout that is quite popular but often only gets used for one thing is a year in pixels, so I wanted to set that up in this journal but keep it flexible and let our giveaway winner decide what they use it for. If you haven't heard of a year in pixels, it's effectively a space for each day of the year where typically people would colour in the box based on their mood for the day. As said though, I love this layout because of its flexibility. You don't have to use it for moods. You could use it for any kind of challenge that you're setting yourself, any kind of daily routine or habit that you're trying to build. You could have it related to finances and make it about savings or spending goals. Related to physical well-being, have it related to exercise or sleep or, anything else. Typically when people set it up, they have a column per month of the year, so January, then February, so on and so forth, starting at the number 1 at the top and going all the way down to 31, just making sure that the spaces for like February 31st aren't there because we don't have a February 31st. But I actually find it more helpful to have a year in pixels set up so that it is week-based. Each row is a week, and then you only have 7 columns, and rather than doing a full year on this one, because the journal is only going to be lasting 6 months, I decided only to set up 6 months worth of weeks. I also made sure I didn't include any of the day spaces for days that aren't actually part of the year, so this one starts on a Wednesday rather than a Monday, and it goes from the 1st of January to the 30th of June. Having it week-based rather than month-based, in terms of like weeks per row rather than months per column, means that you can very clearly see any weekly patterns or trends that happen as you fill it in. For instance, if you were keeping this as maybe like a productivity tracker or like level of energy for each day or something, oftentimes I find that Thursdays are the days that I feel the lowest energy and thus get the least done, and it's by using this type of a tracker that I was able to realize that. Depending on what our giveaway winner wants to use it for, it could be a really powerful tool in realizing any kind of routines or patterns that they have in terms of the completion of something. I didn't want to dictate what they use it for by putting in like mood tracker or anything like that, and I left a space open for a key so that they can use different colors for different happenings, different symbols if they want to, or they could keep it very simple to a yes, no, so yes, I did the thing, color in the box, no, I didn't do the thing, don't color in the box. Because I wasn't sure how many key entries they wanted to have, I decided to leave the key open, so no second line highlights, and also it depends on what color pens they want to use to fill in their tracker. I didn't want to obstruct the ability to put those pen colors down and make them look the way they would typically look on white paper, because I had these brown every second line highlights. This one took about 13 minutes to set up. That time certainly increased by ruling in all of the grid lines for the Year in Pixels tracker, but then on the right hand page we have the quickest layout for the setup, that one coming in at about 5.5 minutes, and this one is going to be for a bingo board. Actually, I'm calling this layout a 25 in 2025. I love that 25 is a square number so that we can have that kind of a bingo board this year. And the reason that it was so quick to set up is because I used a printable rather than drawing in the lines myself. Yes, I can rule a grid. I hopefully proved that by setting up the year in pixels. But because I wanted this grid to sit across 12 centimeters and I wanted there to be 5 columns and 5 rows, Rather than trying to perfectly align those boxes to make sure the spacing was just right, I decided to set it up in Microsoft Word, print it out on sticker paper, and then just stick it into the notebook. It meant that I definitely had the same spacing, both vertically and horizontally, without having to try and put in grid markings myself, because getting an equal split across 12 centimeters for 5 columns and 5 rows means that you have to use 2.6 centimeters? I don't know if that's the right math, don't tell me if I'm wrong. But with a 5mm dot grid, it's just a little bit hard to get that perfect. And as said, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, a bit of a persnickety biscuit, and I wanted this one to look nice and equal and even. Flipping on over though, the next layout we're setting up is going to take up the entire of both pages, and this is going to be for a someday maybe list. I love a someday maybe list. I personally call mine future me problems. I'm kind of considering calling them side quests next year, but essentially this is to hold any of those tasks that you know you want to do at some point, but they don't necessarily need to be done this week, this month, this quarter. Stuff that isn't super urgent, isn't super pressing, but it's still something you'd like to do eventually. Rather than letting those thoughts get lost to the ether, this is the space to jot them down. In terms of the structure, as said, it is super simple. We just have every second line highlights on both sides of the page in these large boxes. I wanted to keep the space here really large because sometimes some of the tasks we need to write down are kind of wordy. They might take up a fairly decent horizontal space. But if need be, if the giveaway winner has quite a lot to write down, they could split these into 2 columns per page, so giving themselves 4 columns across the spread. That's typically how I use mine in my journal, because I can find that most of the time, anything I'm writing down can get fit into half a page worth of width, but in making this one flexible, I wanted there to be ample space for whoever receives this notebook. Remember, if you want to win this notebook, I would love to have you enter. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel and leave a comment so that I know you want to win. This one took about 13 minutes to set up, but then it's over the page and onto one of my favorite layouts. I love putting this in my journal, especially for the start of a new year, and that is what we call a then and again page. The general premise on this one is that we have a bunch of prompts about things that we're kind of curious about recording information about, little things that give us kind of a snapshot of who we are at any given moment in life. We write those ones down the center of the page, and then on one side of the layout we write down the answer at the start of the journal, and on the other side we write down the answer at the end. The key here is trying to pick prompts that you think might change across that span of time. In the case of this journal, that's 6 months, but often when I set mine up, I do it for an entire year. So thinking about the answers that I have on January 1st versus the answers on December 31st, what kind of things might change or might be a little bit different at those 2 times. In setting up this one, I didn't want to specify what the questions or prompts were for our winner, so I just leave the space in the middle open, and you'll have seen that I did stuff up when I went to put in my every second line highlight at the start, kind of encroaching a little bit too close to the middle of the layout. I wanted there to be ample space to write in what those prompts were without them being on top of the brown, so I just went and covered over that one with some white sticker paper. This is my favorite mistake fix. I have used it several times in this setup. Anytime where a line went a little bit wobbly, something wasn't quite where I wanted it to be, and I find that having those kind of mistake fixes in your back pocket kind of takes a little bit of the anxiety that comes with a new journal setup just out of the equation. When it comes to a new journal setup, I'm always a little bit nervous to put pen to paper. I don't want to stuff anything up. It feels like a fresh start and I want to get it right, but in knowing that there are ways to fix mistakes if they happen, it means that my perfectionistic tendencies don't hold me back quite as much. This layout took about 9.5 minutes to set up, but that doesn't include any time that would be taken thinking about the prompts that I might want to include in the middle of the layout. On screen here though, you can see an example of the one I'm using this year and the prompts that I've gone with. We're not quite at the end of the year yet though, so I haven't written in the final responses or the again section, but I do like to see how those things change across the span of a year. I figure that once our giveaway winner receives their notebook, they can decide on what prompts they want, and we do have a list of 50 different examples that you could include in such a layout in our resource library as well. Again, that one's linked in the description box. On the right hand side of this layout, we're including another one of my favorites, and that is a space for a letter to me. Rather than writing the letter into the notebook though, I prefer to type mine up and print it out, mainly because I'm not a super big fan of long form handwritten things. In terms of memory keeping, absolutely gorgeous, love it. But in terms of the time taken to do them, I usually just don't put the time in. Just in case the person who receives this notebook is similar, instead of putting in a space to write in the notebook that letter to themselves, I wanted to put in a pocket that they could slip the letter into. Normally I would just stick an envelope in my notebook, but I didn't have any on hand, so I decided to use some spare dot grid paper to make a little pocket that they can just slide the letter into. This also meant that I could keep it in the same styling as the other layouts we have in the setup, so using that black box to kind of border the pocket, and then just trimming that piece of paper back, folding it appropriately, and double-sided taping it to the page. I tried to make the pocket fairly wide and decently deep. We don't want the letter falling out, and we don't want it to have to be folded like 7 times to actually fit in there, but because the pocket box is stuck onto the page rather than drawn directly onto it, this made for easier decoration as well. I could just stick down the PET elements, not worrying about if they encroached on that box space, and then stuck the pocket over the top of this. In terms of timing, this one took about 10.5 minutes, with a decent chunk of that time going to the pocket making. I love the letter to me page though. Effectively what you do is you write yourself a letter to be opened at the end of your journal. So oftentimes when I set this one up, I do it for the span of a whole year. So on January 1st, writing a letter for December 31st me. Flipping back so that we can flip through, I love this setup. As said, it is one of my favorite themes. I really hope that whoever wins this journal enjoys it as well. I was very mindful going into the page design that I wanted to keep things flexible. I wanted it to be used in a way that they actually want to use their notebook, but also structured to really help them make the most of the year ahead. I want them to hit the ground running for 2025. I want them to achieve the goals that they've set for themselves, and I wanted to make sure that there were scaffolded sections that are going to help them do that. Remember, if you want to win, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel and leave a comment on the video. But if you were on the hunt for more journal inspiration, then I have some of my best tips in this video here. In that one we have over 20 ideas for new things that you could include in your bullet journal setup. Stuff that's a little bit outside of the typical recommendations of put in a future log, you should include an index. So if you're on the hunt for more inspiration, be sure to click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.